Greetings. Back to Policy Analysis and Politics in 2018, Part 3. I'll pick up where I left off, and that will be on the network approach to policy making. And there's a lot of interest in network theory and networking and understanding the relationships and interactions between social actors and agencies and organizations, and also how political power and influence is integrated into the network system, and who can transmit information and who can persuade and who dominates in those situations. And so we start getting into some ideas from the network approach to policy making, looking at different models and how that can be mapped out. And so that's a useful approach. And Noki in Networks as Political Glue, explaining public policy making, again in Sociology and the Public Agenda book I mentioned earlier, talks about this network approach to policy making. And that material's from that chapter. But I think it's real important to start looking at how we can map that out with new networking software today and keep track of changes in networks and modeling, and how one change in one part of that network may lead to changes in others. And then moving on, a book that I read a while back by P.C. Nutt in 2002, Why Decisions Fail. Fascinating book, because I wondered about that, the decision-making process, and why do some decisions fail and others seem to succeed. And so talking about Nutt's work in regards to why decisions fail, some traps that we face, so we want to avoid these. Sometimes it's failure to reconcile claims, that there's still questions out there, and sometimes it seems easier just not to answer the question, but that can lead to devastating problems later on when that question remains unanswered, especially when someone says, well, so-and-so, well, Dr. Winton failed to answer the question XYZ when we asked him. Why is that? What is he hiding? Does he not know? Is there more behind his policy? Also ignoring barriers to actions. That also, there are many barriers that we need to address and face. Or we can set up what seems to be a really good policy, but it's not going to work because there's some roadblocks on that. Also providing ambiguous direction, where we're not clear what exactly is supposed to be done here. Also misusing evaluations, that can be problematic as well. Overlooking ethical issues, very important to make sure that the whole process is done in an ethical manner, and whatever research we have is conducted in an ethical way. And also failing to learn, that we see that as a problem. Failure to learn from our previous mistakes. Also, we see that we need to take a closer look at those particular areas when we get involved in the policy making, decision making steps. And then Brownstein talked about the social construction of public policy, and a fascinating article from the Sociological Practice Review back in 1991. And some of these articles are older than you might expect in a 2018 video, but the rationale is those were really good articles that kind of set where we're going and in our direction. And certainly we have some more recent articles we can look at as well. But I think this really helped us get into where we are now in the policymaking scenarios. So some of the videos I have are just kind of tools that augment your policy, criminal justice policy textbook, as well as your 8 stages of policy research and analysis. So here we think about the social construction of public policy in terms of these steps that we see. Because according to Brownstein, policymaking consists of setting priorities and allocating resources. So when we look at how that's all constructed, we said there's problem identification, definition. I already mentioned that, but it's real important to mention again that, for example, if someone is talking about the opioid crisis, are they talking about illegal use of drugs or legal use of drugs that have led to addictions or abuse? And then is there something else that falls outside of that realm that's relevant to look at as well? And so often we'll see that we may be talking about something, but not specifically the same thing. That, talking about gun control, someone's thinking of assault rifles, and others are thinking of handguns. So we need to really, operationalize the problem. And also looking at program and policy design and development, how we carry that out, how we do that, and how we implement the policy or program. Because we may actually have a policy and the implementation may not follow that particular policy, that we may veer off, or we may have something that looks very different. And so there's actually research methods that we use to see if the program is actually matching up the policy, what it's supposed to, how it's supposed to be implemented. And then also the evaluation of the policy. Did it work? Did it do what it was supposed to do? Were there some unforeseen consequences, negative or positive? And based on evaluation, should we continue the program? Should we modify it, or should we terminate it? So again, and there's some criminal justice programs that have been shown basically not to work. And my question there is, well, do we continue them? I would say, of course not. They don't work. Should we modify or terminate them? And that's where I would say we need to bring in a lot of our research and ideas. And there's one program, and I won't mention it because whenever I mention this program, people actually get really upset. But there's a program I won't mention that has been shown over and over again not to work. But my recommendation has been that program probably has a lot of things that are helpful and useful in it. So if it's modified slightly, it might actually work. There needs to be some modifications and some retesting. And if that doesn't work, then we may want to consider termination of it and looking at other programs that are supposed to do the same thing. But that's the politics of it too. And then what happens when others present or interpret your findings inconsistent with the way you would do it? And so this reminds me of, I got involved in a debate regarding some research that was being conducted at the local level in a community, and I was not happy with the research design. And I was not happy with how that design was implemented, and I was not happy with how the data was analyzed. I just wasn't a happy researcher. But the results were consistent with what I hoped would have been found. Oh, I was pleased to see those results. They were consistent with what I liked. And so where do we go from there? And so how do we make sense of that? I believe those results may or may not be accurate, even though I like them. It's kind of like someone having a study that shows that eating a quart of, or a pint rather, of Ben and Jerry's ice cream every evening is super healthy for you. I like that result, but we kind of know that's probably not accurate based on all this research on food intake or dieting or health or whatever. But I don't know. I don't know for sure, certainly. But I wish that was the case. I mean, it would be great if there was I haven't read any research that shows that eating a pint of Ben and Jerry's every night is good for you. But wow, that would be great if someone had produced research that showed that was the case. So this can also happen with the media and stakeholders. They start getting it wrong, or they have those that are influential come on and talk about things. And you see that all the time. And you have people that are called upon frequently in the media. I think they're just waiting by their Skype phone and waiting for an event to happen so they can go on. And you know, many times they have some expertise, and many times they have no clue what they're talking about, and it's difficult for the public to figure that out. Or they may just present something that's totally wrong, you know, and you know, how do we deal with that? How do we correct that? The example Brownstein uses in his early research here is revolved around crack cocaine. That Brownstein, the example Brownstein uses that in his research findings, that crack cocaine violence is not random, but the media was presented it as random. And so there's a big disconnect there, and that, of course, is very problematic when you start thinking about setting up some policies for reducing the problem. Also, the same study, you know, can lead to several groups making recommendations that are quite different, and so you'll see that, and you'll see the importance of clarifying the findings and talking about the limitations. And then finally, as I get to the last two slides, that Mashrak and Marcus in 2014 in their book on methods for policy research, on page 143 they state that they suggest that we may need to quote them, settle for less when doing so helps bring about change for the better, end quote. So settle for less when doing so helps bring about change for the better. I wish that I had that like a needle-pointed framed statement there on my wall back when I was 21 and trying to work in the research and policy arena related the local level to child abuse and neglect. That I wish I realized that, to quote them again, settle for less when doing so helps bring about change for the better. I think I was too idealistic back then, and I wanted large changes. I wanted to disrupt the system, and you know, they're not going to let some long-haired, bearded 21-year-old right out of college do all that, especially with people who've been working in that system for years and years and years. Fortunately, I looked much older the second year in that job. Well, actually, that wasn't fortunate, but it's unfortunate, but it puts years on you real quick. And then finally, Halpern and Mason in 2015 published a real short article and evaluation called Radical Incrementalism, when they talked about small changes, incremental changes, may be very helpful and beneficial, and then doing small-scale evaluations as well may be beneficial to see what works, what doesn't work, and whether to spread that out into other areas or communities or geographies, and instead of just having this whole huge program that may or may not work. We can start small, test it out, and then see where we go from there. So here are 3 videos, just a little bit on the politics and policy, and this wraps up this video.